Nationalising the energy companies is not something that's been proposed by either Labour or the Tories, but a new poll suggests that maybe they should seriously consider it. YouGov asked over 2,000 British adults whether they supported or opposed bringing the energy companies back into public ownership. As you can see, Labour and Lib Dem voters overwhelmingly support the idea, and just about half of Tory voters want nationalisation too. 47% would support such a proposal, with only 28% against. And when you look at those who voted Tory in 2019, the figure goes up. 53% of them would be in favour of nationalising the energy companies. Now look, the question here is pretty badly framed. What do you mean by energy company? The retailers or the extractors? That distinction really matters when it comes to the impact that nationalisation would have on the cost of energy, sure. But it also doesn't matter that much here, because what the poll really shows is a strong public appetite for radical political action to address the cost of living crisis. And that's across all voters. It's a consensus. If you're listening, Keir Starmer, what this poll is telling you is that if you want to attract Tory voters, be more like Jeremy Corbyn. YouGov have been tracking voter opinions on renationalising energy since 2019. You'll remember that Labour's manifesto for the election that year included the pledge to renationalise all utilities. The purple line here shows the percentage of Tory voters who tended to support nationalisation of energy, while the pink line shows the share of those who strongly supported it. In August 2019, 50% of Tories either tended to support it or strongly supported it, and that figure has remained relatively stable ever since. So today's result isn't even a surprise. The cost of living crisis might be intensifying a Tory desire for nationalisation, but it's been an incredibly popular idea for years, although the media roundly mocked those Labour proposals in 2019. Angela Rayner appeared on Question Time just weeks before the election. The topic was climate change and meat consumption. Then this happened.
Angela, as the party of big state, you're talking about your first 100 days today. What would you say in direct response to Aidan, he's put his hand back up, I will come back to you, about stopping people from eating meat? Talking about the actual question here.
We have to encourage people to make good choices for our climate and our environment, first of all, at an individual level. And actually, my young kids are much more aware of that than what my generation were. And we have to get real, because climate emergency is a real problem. Climate change is a problem, despite what Nigel thinks. But there's
Would you nationalise sausages?
No.
I still find that so shocking to watch. Ash, do you think the media will allow us to have a more grown-up debate around public ownership come the next general election, or will things be as bad as last time?
The media will allow you to have a more grown-up and thoughtful conversation around public ownership, in as much as there is not a politician who can actually deliver it, right? That's the rule of establishment media, Aaron, which is you can complain about the state that society is in as long as there's not a chance of a government getting into power who can meaningfully, radically, and proportionately do something about it. So that's why you can have just 3 years ago, the tenor of discussion around nationalisation being so sneering, only now for many of the same journalists who are amongst some of the most well-paid journalists this country has to offer, saying, hey, you know, this nationalisation thing, it might just do the trick. And it's not just in the area of, you know, would you nationalise sausages? Do you remember when the idea of having free broadband for all was derided as broadband communism, or when an ambitious rewilding environmental policy was being derided by journalists who didn't understand that you can plant more than one tree at once because you don't have Jeremy Corbyn going around the country doing it personally. The journalists in this country are stupid when they want to be, and they're perceptive when they want to be. Right now, they're choosing to be perceptive because there's not really a huge chance of the interests of capital being negatively affected. There's not really much of a chance of their contacts at the top of government being that much affected, whether it is the Tories in the Tory party or the Tories who happen to surround and advise Keir Starmer. And so that's why they can make a choice to go, oh, have you considered this? Because there isn't a chance of the status quo being at all disrupted. There is one last thing that I'd like to add to this, which is about the polling that you showed, which demonstrated that actually there's strong support for nationalisation of public utilities amongst Tory voters. I think one of the things that people forget is that the electorate's ideological disposition and the ideological disposition of a party member or a politician can be very different things. By which I mean that your average voter will tend to have different sets of ideas, some of which might seem to contradict or conflict with one another, and they sit quite happily within the same person because that's what it means to be part of the electorate. And I think that you take a totemic slogan like "Take Back Control," which was, of course, the slogan for the Vote Leave campaign in 2016. And that meant lots of things to lots of people in terms of the precise policy area. But what it summed up was a rebuke to a political disposition which said that the state can't do anything on the issues that you care about. Now, for lots of people who supported Brexit, that only meant immigration. But for many of those people, and indeed a section of Labour voters who voted Leave, it meant this sense of governmental abandonment over the things which dictate and shape the quality of your life. So every time you said, hang on, why is this so shit? The government would hold their hands up and go, oh, sorry, love, can't do anything about it. It's the EU. Now, we've left the EU and those things haven't gotten better. All right. The only thing that's really happened is that the tenor of debate around immigration and asylum in particular has gotten much nastier and the policy much, much crueler. But sewage is still being pumped into our rivers and seas. Leaks from water companies mean that we're all being given hosepipe bans or being told, hey, get used to drink toilet water, while private water companies, their CEOs and their shareholders get outrageous bonuses and dividends year upon year. The energy crisis that we're in the middle of right now is a market failure. So the control that was promised to people in 2016 hasn't been delivered. And that's because those utilities which should be viewed as resources, which are stewarded and controlled by the public and in the public's interest, are instead in private hands, which means that ultimately you don't have any control over it whatsoever.
Yeah, there's a strange dissonance in all of this where you hear the cliche from the sort of Westminster pundits. Well, they might say they like particular, things to be publicly owned in polls, but really they don't trust the state. The default line, which has been the favourite of the Conservative base my entire life, is, for anything, call in the army. They love the state. They love the idea of a overwhelming, warm state solving problems. We've got a few more polls to show you on this topic, more or less. 115,000 Royal Mail postal workers began industrial action on Friday. They're set to walk out again on Wednesday, as well as on 2 days in September. They're striking for pay rises that reflect the current cost of living. Survation has conducted a poll in the lead up to the first day of strikes, that was on Friday. And they asked a sample of people whether they did or didn't support postal workers. As you can see here, 63% of those asked considered strike action justified, 63%. It's almost as though virtually everyone knows these bosses are shafting their workers while enjoying lucrative profits. Basically, they're taking the money out of their pockets, yours too, by the way, as consumers, to hand to shareholders and to themselves with high bonuses. Survation also asked the public what they thought about nationalising Royal Mail. Again, 63% of those polled were in favour of returning the Royal Mail to state ownership, with only 18% who thought it was better off in the private sector. So again, the public strongly supports renationalising Royal Mail, and yet no political party will go near it as a policy offer. Survation also carried out a poll for campaign organisation Enough is Enough. Their aim is to tackle the cost of living crisis by demanding 5 things. According to the Survation polling, 76% support the first demand for a pay rise to match inflation. 84% support the second demand of slashing energy bills. 83% support ending food poverty, though you have to wonder about the 17% who want that to continue. As for decent homes for all, 78% of those polled wanted that demand met, and 72% wanted to see the rich pay more tax. Now, you might think those are silly questions. Who doesn't want to end food poverty or provide decent homes for all? That's fair to an extent. But then why isn't this supposed consensus even remotely reflected in Westminster politics? 72% of people want to increase taxes on the rich. That's something Liz Truss has been arguing against for months. Meanwhile, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer don't want to touch the issue with a barge pole. But this polls well with Tories.